An outlaw's arrow once defined justice for an entire generation. We are venturing deep into the green heart of medieval England to uncover 30 legendary tales of Robin Hood. You will hear the full story behind his most daring heists, meet his loyal band of merry men, and unravel the historical mysteries that shroud this iconic figure. This journey spans ancient ballads, enduring folklore, and cinematic adventures that have kept his rebellious spirit alive for over 7 centuries. Why did a simple archer become the most wanted man in England, and was there truly a historical figure behind the Green Hood? What does the name Robin Hood truly mean to you today? A single monk's gaze in a crowded chapel shattered the outlaw's luck. This is the story of Robin Hood and the Monk, one of the oldest ballads to survive the centuries, and it begins not with a daring theft, but with a simple act of faith. Robin, growing restless in the greenwood, decides to attend Mass in Nottingham. He ignores Little John's warning that it is too dangerous, confident his disguise will keep him safe. But a monk he once robbed recognizes him and immediately alerts the sheriff. The chapel becomes a trap, and Robin is captured, disarmed, and thrown into a cell, his fate seemingly sealed. This moment establishes the core conflict that will echo through every tale to come, the relentless struggle between the outlaw and the law. Back in Sherwood, the mood is grim. Little John and Much the miller's son are not just followers, they are brothers in arms, and their loyalty is immediate and absolute. They do not mourn. They plan. Their rescue is a masterclass in cunning and reconnaissance. Disguising themselves as fishermen and then as messengers, they infiltrate the heavily guarded Nottingham, learning the layout of the streets and the routines of the king's own men. Their cleverness underscores a vital theme, that brains are often more powerful than a bow. They find the monk who betrayed their leader, and the ballad describes a swift, brutal end for him, a stark reminder of the grim justice of that era where betrayal was met with finality. This act sets a serious tone for the adventures to follow, proving that the Greenwood's justice was as sharp as any blade in the sheriff's castle. A clever mind can be a far greater disguise than any cloak or hood. This truth lies at the heart of our next legend, Robin Hood and the Potter. Here, we see the outlaw trade his Lincoln green for the dusty clothes of a tradesman, not to hide, but to launch a bold and public deception. Restless for a new challenge, Robin waylays an honest potter on the road to Nottingham, but instead of taking the man's goods, he proposes a trade, his fine clothes for the potter's humble wares and cart. It is a chance for Robin to walk directly into the lion's den, to test his wits against the sheriff in the most audacious way possible by becoming someone else entirely. He arrives in the bustling market of Nottingham, his cart laden with pots and jugs. With a natural charm that endears him to the other vendors and townsfolk, he sells his wares, but not at a fair price. In a brilliant twist, Robin Hood the Potter deliberately sells his goods for far less than they are worth, bringing cheer to the common people and quickly winning their quiet, unspoken loyalty. This is not mere bartering, it is a small, public act of rebellion, a subtle redistribution of wealth right under the sheriff's nose. His success in blending in is so complete that he even gains an audience with the sheriff's wife, who is taken with his charming manner and his curiously low prices. The sheriff himself, amused by this strangely generous Potter, invites him to a grand archery contest. This is the moment Robin has been waiting for. Amongst the kingdom's finest bowmen, the disguised outlaw steps onto the field. He draws his bow, not with the flamboyance of a hero, but with the practiced ease of a craftsman. And when his arrow finds the very center of the target, he claims the grand prize, a magnificent silver arrow. The sheriff, utterly fooled, even offers this skilled potter a permanent position in his household. Robin, barely containing his laughter, politely declines, citing his simple life on the road. He leaves Nottingham not as a fleeing outlaw, but as a celebrated champion, his true identity a secret triumph. The celebration that night in Sherwood Forest was one of pure, unbridled joy. Robin returned to his men not with a tale of a narrow escape, but with a story of brilliant deception and a gleaming silver arrow to prove it. They feasted and laughed, not just at the sheriff's expense, but in celebration of their leader's cunning. This tale reinforces a powerful theme that Robin's greatest weapon was often his ability to move unseen among the very people he championed. He did not just rob from the rich to give to the poor, he became one of the poor to outwit the rich, proving that true power lies in understanding the hearts of the people. Even the deepest shadows of Sherwood Forest could not hide the hunter who wore a cloak of human skin. This is the chilling tale of Robin Hood and Guy of Gisborne, a ballad that plunges us into a far darker chapter of the outlaw's life. The villain here is not the bumbling sheriff, but a professional killer, a sinister knight named Sir Guy, who has been paid a rich bounty to bring back Robin's head. Their confrontation is not a game of wits, but a brutal, personal struggle for survival. Robin, separated from his men, wanders alone through the woods until he comes face to face with this grim stranger. The two men, recognizing each other for who they are, do not exchange pleasantries. They draw their swords and engage in a desperate duel under the ancient trees. This is not the clean shot of an archery contest, but a messy, close-quarters fight where every parry and thrust carries the weight of mortality. The ballad describes the clash of steel and the raw physical exertion, a stark reminder that Robin's life was often measured in seconds and inches. He ultimately triumphs, but the victory is somber. To ensure his own survival and to continue his mission, Robin performs a grisly act. He decapitates Sir Guy and takes the knight's clothing and horn as his own. This is more than simple disguise, it is a profound and unsettling transformation. By wearing his enemy's skin, Robin literally cloaks himself in the identity of the man sent to kill him. He becomes the hunter to evade the hunt, a recurring motif that speaks to the fluid nature of identity in a world where being recognized could mean death. This story introduces a more personal, vengeful enemy, a foe whose sole purpose is annihilation, and in doing so, it showcases Robin's raw prowess in single combat, a skill as vital as his legendary archery. The symbolism of this act echoes through the legend, reminding us that deception was not merely a trick for Robin Hood, but a fundamental tool of survival. A new face soon joined the ranks under the greenwood trees, one whose fiery spirit would be both an asset and a challenge. Will Scarlet arrived not as a seasoned outlaw, but as Robin's own nephew, a young man with a quick sword and an even quicker temper. His introduction to the band was anything but peaceful, often involving a flash of steel and a heated argument, yet his loyalty was never in question. This loyalty, however, is precisely what led him into the sheriff's clutches. During a reckless solo mission to confront a corrupt tax collector, Will's anger outpaced his caution, and he was ambushed by a full patrol of the sheriff's men. Beaten and bound, he was dragged through the gates of Nottingham and thrown into the deepest, darkest dungeon, a place designed to make men forget the sun. When the news reached Sherwood, the reaction was immediate and decisive. Robin did not hesitate. This was not a strategic target or a stolen prize, this was family. The rescue of Will Scarlet became the band's sole objective, a mission that would test their unity and their courage like never before. The plan was a masterpiece of coordinated chaos. Little John led one group to set a massive fire in a warehouse district on the far side of town, creating a wall of smoke and panic that drew the guards away from the castle walls. Meanwhile, Robin, with a small hand-picked team, scaled the cold, damp stones of the dungeon tower under the cover of the roaring distraction. They moved like shadows, silent and swift, dispatching the few remaining sentries with quiet efficiency. But the true test came inside the dungeon itself. The rescue was not a simple snatch and grab. The sheriff, anticipating a move, had stationed his best men in the corridor leading to Will's cell. What followed was a fierce, claustrophobic battle in the narrow passageways, the clash of swords echoing off the stone walls. Robin and his men fought not for gold, but for one of their own, and that ferocity broke the guards' line. They found Will Scarlet shackled but unbroken, his spirit still burning bright. His integration into the band was now complete, forged not just by shared ideals, but by the shared experience of a desperate rescue. Will's fiery temper and his skill with a sword added a new, passionate layer to the merry men, a reminder that this band of brothers was woven from many different, and sometimes volatile, threads. Even the strongest leader needs a second in command who can challenge him. The bond between Robin Hood and Little John was not born from peaceful agreement, but from a thunderous clash of staves on a simple log bridge. Robin, confident and accustomed to being the finest fighter in the wood, came across a giant of a man blocking his path. The stranger refused to yield, and a challenge was instantly issued. The weapon of choice was the quarterstaff, a simple, sturdy length of wood that became an extension of the will in the hands of a master. The ensuing duel was not a petty squabble, but a true test of strength and skill, a whirlwind of powerful strikes and clever parries. The giant, with his immense reach and surprising agility, fought with a calm, controlled power that slowly overwhelmed Robin's own considerable talent. With one final well-placed blow, the outlaw leader was sent tumbling from the bridge into the cold waters of the stream below. This was a humbling moment, a public defeat that could have shattered a lesser man's authority. But Robin Hood's true greatness shone in his response. Instead of anger or pride, he laughed, reached out a hand to his victor, and asked the giant to join his band. He recognized that true strength for their cause lay not in his own supremacy, but in gathering the most skilled and honorable fighters, regardless of who was the best. The man introduced himself as John Little, but Robin, with a characteristic grin, gave him the nickname that would echo through history, Little John. This origin story establishes a crucial hierarchy within the Merry Men, one based purely on merit and proven skill. Little John's immense size and strength made him a formidable warrior, but his loyalty and sharp mind made him Robin's most trusted lieutenant, the one he turned to for the most dangerous missions. Their friendship, forged in the waters of that stream, became the unshakable foundation upon which the entire legend was built. A holy man with a wicked staff and a hearty laugh was the last person Robin expected to find deep in the woods. Their meeting was not one of quiet prayer, but of a very physical and very wet challenge. The story goes that Robin heard of a certain Curtal friar, a man of the cloth known for his strength and his refusal to be bullied, living near a river crossing. Ever confident, Robin decided to test this friar himself. He found the man, a stout and cheerful figure named Tuck, and demanded to be carried across the river. The friar, with a knowing glint in his eye, agreed without hesitation, but when they reached the deepest part of the current, the friar did the unexpected. He simply tipped Robin over his shoulder, sending the outlaw spluttering into the cold water. It was a perfect and deeply humiliating reversal. The fight that followed was pure comedy, a chaotic brawl in the river shallows. Robin, enraged and dripping, drew his sword. The friar, armed only with his heavy quarterstaff, met him blow for blow. They fought up the bank and into the forest, splashing, stumbling, and striking until both were utterly exhausted, neither able to gain a clear advantage. As they lay on the grass, panting and bruised, their anger melted away into something far more powerful, a shared, booming laughter. They recognized in each other a kindred spirit, a man of principle who was also a formidable fighter. This mutual respect was the foundation of a new and vital alliance. Robin did not just gain another soldier that day, he gained a spiritual guide and a jovial heart for his band of outlaws. Friar Tuck brought a unique dimension to the greenwood, a man who could bless a feast, hear a confession, and then crack a few heads with his staff if the situation demanded it. His presence blurred the lines between the sacred and the profane, suggesting that faith and justice could be found even outside the walls of a church in the heart of an outlaw's camp. A minstrel's sorrowful song drifting through Sherwood Forest proved that even an outlaw could champion the cause of true love. Allan a Dale was not a fighter but a musician, his only weapon a lute and his only armor a beautiful melody. He came to Robin Hood not for gold or revenge, but with a broken heart. His true love, a young woman named Ellen, was being forced by her father to marry a wealthy, elderly knight, a man she did not love, all for the security and status his money would bring. Allan's plea was a simple one. He needed a hero, not to rob, but to rescue. This mission appealed to Robin's own sense of justice, a fight against a different kind of tyranny, the tyranny of forced obligation. The plan Robin devised was perhaps his most audacious yet, a performance that required him to trade his Lincoln green for the solemn robes of a bishop. With Friar Tuck playing the part of his faithful monastic assistant, they walked boldly into the church where the unwanted wedding was to take place. The real bishop, conveniently waylaid by a few of Little John's men on the road, was nowhere to be found. Robin, in his elaborate disguise, stood before the congregation, his face shadowed by a hood, his voice lowered to a pious murmur. The wealthy old knight and Ellen's father beamed with pride, completely fooled by the impostor. Then, at the critical moment, Robin halted the ceremony. He declared that before the wedding could proceed, it was tradition to see if any other man present had a prior claim to the bride's heart. On cue, Allan a Dale stepped from the crowd, his lute in hand. He sang a song of his love for Ellen, a melody so pure and heartfelt that it silenced the entire church. Robin then dramatically tore off his disguise, revealing the famous outlaw, and pronounced that true love would not be denied by gold or status. With the merry men now surrounding the church to ensure there were no objections, Friar Tuck, in his official capacity, properly married Allan and Ellen on the spot. The celebration that followed was one of the most joyous ever held in the greenwood, filled with music, dancing, and laughter. This tale weaves a vital thread of romance and artistry into the legend, reminding us that Robin Hood's rebellion was not just about wealth, but about the freedom to choose one's own path in life. It showed that his cunning could be used for more than tricking the sheriff. It could mend a broken heart and prove that the greatest riches are not silver or gold, but love and song. A wealthy bishop's journey through Sherwood became a lesson he would never forget. This is the tale of Robin Hood and the Bishop of Hereford, a classic confrontation that pits the outlaw's cunning against the greed of a corrupt church official. The bishop was known for his love of fine robes and gold, a man who preached piety while his own chests overflowed with wealth extracted from the poor. As his richly decorated carriage trundled down the forest road, it was not a secret to anyone, least of all the watchful eyes in the greenwood. Robin and his men did not simply ambush the carriage. They invited the bishop to a feast. They surrounded the procession not with drawn swords, but with an offer of hospitality he could not safely refuse. The bishop, bewildered and furious, was escorted deep into the forest to a clearing where a grand meal was laid out on the grass, a feast funded by the very people he had taxed. They sat him down and insisted he eat and drink with them, forcing him to partake in the simple, hearty food of the common folk. This was the first layer of his humiliation, to be treated as an equal by men he considered beneath him. The scene reflects a deep anti-clerical sentiment common in medieval England. where many saw church leaders as oppressive figures more interested in wealth than in spiritual guidance. People were frustrated with a church that demanded tithes while its bishops lived in luxury. Robin's actions gave voice to that frustration. After the feast, the real business began. Robin demanded the bishop empty his coffers, taking the gold intended for the bishop's own lavish use and redistributing it to those in need, but the final, most symbolic act was yet to come. The merry men, with laughter and mock ceremony, stripped the bishop of his fine, expensive robes. They left him in his simple undergarments, a visual representation of his stripped-away pride and false piety. He was then sent on his way, a cold and embarrassed man, with a clear message to deliver to other powerful figures. The bishop's humiliation was not just a personal punishment, it was a public performance, a warning shot to any authority figure who used their power to oppress. It demonstrated that in the greenwood, a man was judged by his actions, not by the fine cloth he wore or the title he held. This tale cemented Robin Hood's role not just as a robber of the rich, but as a moral judge in a world where the official judges were often corrupt. The sheriff's rage finally hardened into a clever public trap. He announced a grand archery contest with a magnificent golden arrow as the prize, knowing the one man in England who could not resist such a challenge. The entire scheme was designed to lure Robin Hood into the open, with the sheriff's best guards mingling in the crowd, their hands never far from their swords, all watching for a single face among hundreds. Robin understood the danger perfectly, but the lure of the contest and the chance to publicly shame his enemy was too great to ignore. He would not just enter the competition, he would win it right under the sheriff's nose. His disguise this time was a masterpiece of simple deception. He did not become a tradesman or a bishop, but a simple, stooped tanner, his face smudged with dirt and his famous Lincoln green replaced with worn, stained leather. He walked with a slight limp, his head down, the very picture of a humble craftsman trying his luck. He blended into the crowd of commoners and yeomen, his bow looking old and unremarkable, just another face in the sea of hopeful archers. One by one, the finest bowmen in the region stepped to the line. Their shots were impressive, arrows thudding into the targets with precision. Then the old tanner shuffled forward. His first shot was good, but not spectacular, landing just outside the center. His second was better. With the final deciding shot, the stoop left his shoulders, his posture straightened, and he drew his bow with a fluid, powerful grace that was unmistakable. The arrow flew straight and true, splitting the previous best shot and embedding itself dead in the center of the target. A stunned silence fell over the field before it erupted into cheers from the common folk. The sheriff, his face a mask of forced politeness, had to present the golden arrow to this grimy stranger. As the tanner accepted the prize, he did not simply flee. He looked the sheriff directly in the eye, a fierce grin breaking through the dirt on his face. Then he turned, melted back into the cheering crowd, and by the time the guards realized what had happened, he was already at the edge of the field. From the safety of the distant tree line, he turned back, raised the gleaming golden arrow high so it caught the sun, and his voice echoed across the field, a taunt and a promise all in one. The golden arrow was far more than a trophy. It became a symbol of intellectual victory, a shining proof that cunning and skill could humiliate raw power on its own stage. That arrow, later displayed proudly in Sherwood Forest, was not just a prize won, but a message delivered. Every time the sheriff thought of it, he was reminded not of Robin's archery, but of his own public foolishness, a humiliation that cut deeper than any sword. A butcher's cart rolling into Nottingham held a secret that would turn the sheriff's own greed against him. Robin Hood, ever restless for a new game, devised a plan that required not the robes of a bishop or the stoop of a tanner, but the bloody apron of a tradesman. He waylaid a real butcher on the road, purchasing his cart, his meat, and even his clothes to create a perfect disguise. The key to his deception was the meat itself, prime venison from the king's own deer, a crime punishable by death, now dressed and presented for public sale. Robin entered the bustling market not as a hidden observer, but as a loud and charismatic vendor, hawking his fine cuts at prices so low they drew a constant crowd. His success was immediate, and the rumor of this strangely generous butcher quickly reached the sheriff's ears. Intrigued by the tales of such high-quality meat, the sheriff summoned the butcher to his own hall. He was impressed by the man's confident demeanor and the undeniable excellence of his wares, completely unaware he was admiring the very poaching that plagued his forests. In a moment of spectacular irony, the sheriff invited this charming butcher to stay for a feast, a meal that would be famously paid for with the sheriff's own coin. Robin played his part flawlessly, sharing stories of his fictional trade and earning the sheriff's trust over a table laden with food. The ultimate deception came when the sheriff, thoroughly charmed, asked where the butcher found such magnificent game. Robin, with a perfectly straight face, promised to lead him to a secret clearing in the woods where the finest deer in England could be found. Blinded by greed and the promise of unlimited venison for his own table, the sheriff agreed to a private hunting trip the very next day. He walked directly into a trap of his own making, following the one man he hunted deepest into the heart of Sherwood Forest. The moment they entered the greenwood, the merry men emerged from behind every tree, their bows drawn. The sheriff found himself surrounded, not by deer, but by the very outlaws he had spent a fortune trying to capture. The humiliation was absolute. Robin and his men did not harm him, but they certainly made him pay for his folly. They charged him a hefty ransom for his safe return, a sum that was promptly redistributed to the poor families of Nottingham. This tale masterfully blurs the line between honest trade and outlaw cunning, showing how Robin used the mechanisms of commerce itself as a weapon. He did not just rob the rich, he sold them their own downfall, proving that the most effective deceptions are those that appeal to a man's own desires. Even the greatest of legends must one day meet their end. The final tale of Robin Hood is not one of triumphant archery or cunning escape, but a quiet, somber story of betrayal that closes the circle on a life lived in defiance. It begins with Robin feeling unwell, his strength fading in a way that no forest herb could cure. He decided to seek help from his own cousin, the prioress of Kirklees, a woman who ran a small religious house and was known for her skills in healing. It was a fatal miscalculation born of family trust. The prioress, however, had secretly made a deal with a bitter enemy of Robin's, likely the sheriff or Sir Guy's kin. Under the guise of treatment, she proposed a medieval practice called bloodletting, a common remedy for various ailments. She made a small cut in his arm to drain the bad blood, but then, with cold intent, she left the wound open, allowing his life to flow away. Robin, weakened and trapped in the upper room of the priory, realized too late the depth of her treachery. As the world grew dim, he summoned his last reserves of strength. He asked for his bow, and with a final trembling effort, he loosed one last arrow from the window. He instructed Little John, who had come to find him, to bury him wherever the arrow fell. The shot was not one of power, but of pure, stubborn will, a final act of self-determination. The legends say it landed a considerable distance away in a quiet grove, marking a grave far from the halls of power. His death has never been satisfactorily explained. Was it simple family betrayal, a political assassination orchestrated by his enemies, or did he succumb to a lingering illness that the prioress merely exploited? This ambiguity has fueled centuries of debate. The symbolic weight of his end, however, is clear. It marked the closing of a chapter, the end of an era where one man's rebellion could challenge the entire established order. The greenwood grew quieter after that. The merry men disbanded, and the world moved on. Yet, the place where that final arrow landed remains a place of pilgrimage, a silent testament to the fact that while the archer died, the aim of his legend was eternally true. A lone figure moved through the forest with a silence that rivaled Robin's own. This was no common forester, but a king's ranger, a man sworn to protect the royal deer and uphold the law of the land. Their meeting was inevitable, a collision of two masters of the greenwood. Robin, ever confident, challenged the ranger to an archery contest, believing he could easily humble this agent of the crown. But the ranger, whose name has been lost to time, simply nodded and nocked an arrow. What followed was not a humiliation, but a stunning display of equals. Arrow after arrow found its mark, each man matching the other shot for shot, until their targets were a cluster of feathered shafts with no clear victor. Frustration soon turned the contest into a fight. They clashed with quarterstaffs in a flurry of powerful blows, the crack of wood echoing through the trees. It was a brutal, exhausting struggle, yet neither could gain the upper hand. Finally, breathing heavily and leaning on their staves, they simply stopped, staring at one another with a newfound, grudging respect. This ranger was not a villain. He was a man of honor, bound by a different oath, yet he understood the forest and its unwritten laws in the same way Robin did. He protected the king's game not for gold, but out of a deep reverence for the natural order. Their draw was more significant than any victory, a quiet acknowledgement that the world was not simply divided into corrupt sheriffs and righteous outlaws. Some men in power were just men, trying to do their duty with integrity. This tale introduces a vital shade of gray into the legend, reminding us that Robin's true enemy was never authority itself, but the corruption that twisted it. The ranger likely went back to his patrols, and Robin faded back into the shadows, both carrying the memory of an opponent who was, in his own way, a kind of brother. The ragged clothes of a beggar became the perfect cloak for a different kind of hunt. Robin Hood, finding the main roads watched too closely, knew he needed to become invisible. He encountered a poor beggar on the road, a man whose life was defined by his tattered cloak and his simple wooden bowl, but instead of taking the man's few coins, Robin offered a trade, his own fine Lincoln green for the beggar's rags. It was a profound exchange, the outlaw willingly embracing the lowest rung of society to move with a freedom his fame otherwise denied him. Disguised in grime and tatters, he shuffled into the town, his head bowed, his eyes missing nothing. He was no longer a figure of fear or legend, just another face in the crowd of the desperate and forgotten. This disguise allowed him to listen to the conversations in the market square, to hear the complaints of the people against the sheriff's new taxes, and to learn the patrol routes of the guards who glanced at him with pity or disgust before looking away. He was gathering intelligence not as a spy, but as a ghost. The true heart of the tale, however, lies in the small acts of kindness he performed while in this humble role. He shared the little food he had with other beggars who had even less. He gave a few secret coins to a mother struggling to buy bread for her children, pressing them into her hand with a whisper before melting back into the shadows. The irony was rich and purposeful, an outlaw, himself a criminal in the eyes of the law, performing quiet acts of charity while posing as a beggar. He was not just evading the sheriff's men, he was living among the people he had sworn to protect, experiencing their daily struggles in the most direct way possible. This story offers a sharp social commentary on poverty, suggesting that those who society casts aside are often the most invisible, and that true nobility has nothing to do with fine clothes or a title. When the sheriff's guards finally began a house-to-house search for the outlaw, they paid no mind to the ragged man huddled in a doorway, his face smeared with dirt. They looked right through him, seeing only a beggar, and in that moment of supreme deception, Robin Hood understood the power of true humility. He had used the world's disregard for the poor as his greatest weapon, proving that sometimes the best way to see clearly is to become someone nobody bothers to look at. Even within the sheriff's own castle, the lines of loyalty were not always clear. A quiet, overlooked drama unfolded in the private chambers of his wife, a woman who saw the world through a different lens than her vengeful husband. While the sheriff plotted and raged against the outlaw, his lady watched from the high windows, observing the suffering in the town below and hearing the whispered tales of a man who stole from her husband's rich allies to feed the hungry. One particular story tells of a chance encounter in the market where Robin, disguised as the potter, charmed her with his wit and his curiously low prices. This brief meeting planted a seed of sympathy that would later bloom into a quiet act of rebellion when the sheriff boasted of a new, foolproof plan to ambush Robin at a specific ford in the river. His wife listened with a carefully neutral face. She knew the men he was sending were cruel and that the outcome would be a bloody spectacle. Later that evening, under the guise of taking the air, she walked to a secluded part of the castle garden where a trusted servant, known to have contacts in the town, was waiting. A simple, unsigned message was passed along, a cryptic warning about the dangers of traveling near that particular river crossing. The message found its way to Sherwood, and the ambush was met with an empty riverbank. The sheriff returned home in a fury, baffled by his enemy's seeming clairvoyance, never suspecting the dissenting heart beating right under his own roof. What could motivate such a betrayal? Perhaps it was a genuine sense of justice, a quiet revolt against her husband's harsh methods, or maybe it was something more personal, a fascination with the romantic, chivalrous figure the ballads described, a stark contrast to the often petty and greedy man she was bound to. This subtle thread of domestic conflict adds a profound layer of complexity to the legend. It transforms the sheriff from a simple villain into a man who could not even command absolute loyalty in his own home, highlighting the isolating nature of his corrupt power. His war against Robin Hood was not just fought on the roads and in the forests, but in the very heart of his personal life, a quiet conflict that proved no fortress was impervious to the appeal of a just cause. A dusty road through Sherwood could turn any stranger into a rival in an instant. Robin Hood, patrolling his domain, came upon a wandering peddler, a man bent under the weight of his own pack, trudging steadily down the narrow path. Neither man would yield the right of way. The peddler, despite his humble trade, stood his ground with a quiet confidence that immediately intrigued the outlaw leader. Words were exchanged, tempers flared, and a challenge was swiftly issued. This was not about robbery, but respect, a test of mettle played out with quarterstaffs on a sun-dappled forest track. The fight was fierce and surprisingly even. Robin, a master of the staff, found himself matched blow for blow. The peddler was no ordinary traveler. He was a fighter of immense skill, his movements economical and powerful, each parry and strike speaking of a life lived by his wits and his strength. They fought until both were panting and bruised, their staves cracking against each other until, in a moment of mutual exhaustion, they simply stopped, leaning on their weapons and staring at one another with a newfound, grudging admiration. The peddler, in some versions named Gamwell, or even a disguised knight, had proven his worth not with words, but with action. Robin's anger melted away, replaced by his instinct for recognizing valuable allies. He laughed, clapped the man on the shoulder, and invited him to share a meal at the camp. This ritual of testing strangers was vital to the survival of the merry men. Their strength relied on a constant, organic recruitment, finding skilled and honorable individuals in the unlikeliest of places. A wandering peddler today could be a loyal brother in arms tomorrow, his knowledge of the wider world and his proven combat skills adding a new layer to the band's capabilities. This story reflects the ever-changing, fluid nature of the Greenwood Fellowship, a community built not on birthright, but on shared courage and a willingness to stand your ground. A foreign knight rode into Sherwood with the weight of a kingdom on his shoulders. This is the tale of Robin Hood and the Prince of Aragon, a story that pushes the legend into the realm of epic fantasy. The prince was no local bully or greedy sheriff, but a champion of immense renown, a warrior who had traveled from a distant, sun-baked land, perhaps Spain or a mythical Mediterranean kingdom, to test his skill against the most famous outlaw in England. His challenge was direct and public, a call for single combat to prove once and for all who was the greatest fighter in the world. The stakes were not just personal pride, but the very honor of the nation. Robin, of course, accepted. The duel that followed was unlike any brawl with a forester or a desperate struggle with Guy of Gisborne. This was a formal, chivalric contest, fought with swords on an open field, a spectacle witnessed by the merry men and the prince's own retinue. The Prince of Aragon was a whirlwind of steel, his technique refined and his strength formidable. He fought with a style unfamiliar to English eyes, his blade moving in unpredictable arcs, and for a long while it seemed Robin was outmatched. The outlaw was driven back, parrying desperately, his own skill tested to its absolute limit. This was not a fight he could win with a single clever trick. Victory demanded every ounce of his endurance, adaptability, and raw courage. He studied the prince's rhythms, learned the patterns of his foreign style, and slowly, turn by exhausting turn, began to counter it. The final blow was not a lucky strike, but a hard-earned triumph of will and skill, the English longsword finally finding its mark against the exotic blade. Robin's victory over the Prince of Aragon did more than just add another trophy to the greenwood. It transformed him from a local hero into a national champion. This tale, wildly fantastical compared to the grounded ballads of his early exploits, signaled a crucial expansion of the legend. Storytellers were no longer content to have him merely outwit the Sheriff of Nottingham. They now pitted him against the greatest warriors of the entire world, making him a symbol of English prowess on an international stage. This was the local folklore of Sherwood, absorbing the grand traditions of international romance, where knights errant battled supernatural foes and rescued princesses. By placing Robin at the center of such a narrative, the common people of England could proudly claim a hero who could stand toe-to-toe with any foreign prince or emperor's champion, a man who proved that the heart of an English yeoman was the equal of any noble bloodline in Christendom. Even a master archer can be humbled by the simple art of fishing. Restless for a new adventure, Robin Hood left his bow in Sherwood and traveled to the coast, determined to master the sea as he had the forest. He hired a small boat, convinced that his legendary skill would translate easily to catching cod, but the sea is a fickle realm, and Robin's first attempts were a comedy of errors. His line tangled, his bait was stolen by clever crabs, and his legendary patience snapped with every empty net. He was a king of the greenwood reduced to a frustrated novice, much to the quiet amusement of the local fishermen who watched the famous outlaw struggle with their daily craft. Their amusement, however, soon turned to greed. A group of rough, burly fishermen saw this struggling stranger as an easy target. They rowed alongside his boat, demanding he hand over what little money he had as a toll for fishing in their waters. It was a shakedown, a test of mettle on the open water. Robin, initially playing the part of the scared merchant, feigned compliance before a fierce grin broke across his face. In an instant, the dynamic shifted. He seized an oar, not as a tool for rowing, but as a quarterstaff. The confined space of the boat became his new dueling ground. He moved with the practiced grace of 100 forest fights, parrying and striking with the heavy wood, sending the surprised fishermen tumbling into the cold sea with a series of swift, precise blows. They swam for shore in a panic, leaving their own boat and gear in the hands of the man they had tried to rob. Now the captain of 2 vessels, Robin's luck transformed. He combined the gear from both boats and cast his nets with a newfound understanding. Whether through sheer force of will or the favor of the sea gods, his nets came up bursting with fish, a haul so large it dwarfed every other catch that day. He sailed back to the docks not as a failure, but as the winner of the unspoken daily competition, selling his massive catch and distributing the profits among the wider fishing community, those who earned an honest living without bullying their neighbors. This tale resonates because it shows a hero willingly stepping out of his comfort zone. We laugh at his initial failure because it makes him human, and we cheer his triumph because it proves his core character, that his courage and adaptability were not bound to any single environment. Whether in a forest, a marketplace, or on the rolling waves, Robin Hood's true weapon was an indomitable spirit that refused to be bested. A knight's honor was measured not by his lands, but by his word. This is the story of Robin Hood and the Valiant Knight, a narrative that complicates the simple division between the nobility and the oppressed. The knight, often named Sir Richard at the Lee, was a man of genuine virtue who had fallen into desperate poverty. A corrupt abbot, exploiting a debt the knight had taken to fund a noble crusade, was poised to seize his family's ancestral home. The knight rode through Sherwood not as a hunter, but as a broken man, his armor dull and his spirit weighed down by the impending ruin of his lineage. Robin and his men, expecting a wealthy lord to relieve of his gold, instead found a nobleman in shabby finery, his pride all but extinguished. They listened to his story, a tale not of laziness, but of misfortune and institutional greed, and their response was immediate. Robin saw in this knight a kindred spirit, a man crushed by the same corrupt system that preyed on the poor. He offered a loan, a staggering sum of money to repay the abbot, taken directly from the coffers the merry men had stolen from the greedy and the cruel. This was not a gift, but a test of the knight's character. Robin demanded only that the knight swear to return in 1 year and 1 day to repay the debt, placing his trust entirely in the man's vow. The knight, his hope restored, accepted the gold and rode off to reclaim his honor. The deeper meaning of this loan resonates with the medieval ideal of chivalry, a code that demanded courage, loyalty, and protection for the weak. The corrupt abbot and the sheriff embodied the betrayal of these ideals, using their power for personal gain. The impoverished knight, however, still held to that older, purer standard. And Robin Hood, the outlaw, became its most unlikely enforcer. He was not fighting against nobility itself, but against its corruption, supporting the righteous few who still practiced the justice they preached. True to his word, exactly 1 year and 1 day later, the valiant knight returned to the greenwood. He could have kept the money, rationalizing that an outlaw had no legal claim to it. But his honor was his most precious possession. He repaid the loan in full, and in some versions of the tale, he even brought additional gifts as a token of his gratitude. This act cemented a powerful alliance, proving that virtue could exist on both sides of the law. The story brilliantly inverts the social order, showing an outlaw as a banker of last resort for the aristocracy and a judge of their moral worth. Robin Hood, in aiding the valiant knight, demonstrated that his rebellion was not a war on class, but a crusade for a more honorable world, where a man's promise was the true currency of his soul. Robin Hood's pride met its match on a lonely hillside, not in a knight or a ranger, but in a simple shepherd. The outlaw, believing the man was blocking his path on purpose, strode forward with his usual confidence, demanding the shepherd move aside. The shepherd, a quiet man named George Green, leaned on his crook and calmly refused. He had his flock to tend, and he would not be bullied from his duty. A challenge was inevitable, and the weapon chosen was the quarterstaff. Robin expected a quick and humbling victory, but from the first clash of wood, he knew he was in a real fight. The shepherd's movements were not the trained flourishes of a soldier, but the efficient, powerful strokes of a man who spent his life wrestling stubborn sheep and fending off wolves. Every parry was solid, every strike was meant to unbalance, and his footing on the grassy slope was unshakable. The fight was a long and bruising affair, a whirlwind of dust and cracking staves that left Robin panting and, for the first time in a long while, genuinely bested. With a final clever twist of his staff, the shepherd sent Robin's weapon flying and the outlaw himself tumbling to the ground. Lying in the grass, staring up at the sky, Robin did not feel anger, but a surge of pure, unadulterated respect. He laughed, a sound of genuine delight, and reached up a hand to the shepherd. He had discovered that true strength was not the sole property of trained fighters or men of title, but could be found in the calloused hands of the humblest laborer. This encounter reinforced a central pillar of the legend, that worth is measured by action, not by birth. The shepherd's quiet dignity and surprising skill so impressed Robin that he invited the man to join his band. Georgia Green, in some versions of the tale, accepted, trading his lonely hillside for the fellowship of the greenwood, his intimate knowledge of the high country and his formidable strength becoming a new asset for the merry men. His presence was a constant, living reminder to Robin that he did not lead a band of invincible heroes, but a fellowship of the capable and the courageous, gathered from every walk of life. The greatest threats to tyranny were not always nobles with swords, but sometimes shepherds with staves. The rough hands of a tanner knew more about hides than they did about holding a bow. Robin Hood, ever curious about the world outside his own, sought out the local tanner in his workshop, a place pungent with the smell of oak bark and curing leather. He did not go as a customer, but as a challenger, confident he could humble any tradesman in a fight. The tanner, a burly man named Arthur, was not intimidated by the famous outlaw. He was a man whose daily labor was a battle against tough animal skins, and he saw no reason to back down from a fight with a man. They agreed to a brawl, but not with swords or staves. The tanner insisted they use the tools of his trade, heavy wooden paddles used for beating and softening hides. The fight was a messy, brutal spectacle, a far cry from the elegant duels of knights. They swung the heavy paddles, the blows landing with solid, jarring thuds. Robin was a master fighter, but the tanner was a force of nature, his strength forged by a lifetime of hard, physical work. He absorbed strikes that would have felled a lesser man and returned them with double the force. Robin soon found himself on the defensive, his arms aching from blocking the relentless, powerful swings. The tanner's resilience was astounding, a testament to the quiet, uncelebrated endurance of the medieval laborer. When the fight finally ended in an exhausted draw, Robin looked at the tanner not with defeat, but with profound admiration. He saw in Arthur a strength that was not taught in fencing schools, but earned through dawn to dusk toil. The offer to join the merry men was immediate and sincere. This tale, like those of the potter and the peddler, firmly roots Robin's legend in the soil of medieval working life. He did not just live in the forest apart from society, he constantly engaged with it, learning from and recruiting the butchers, the tanners, the shepherds, and the farmers. These occupational disguise stories served a vital purpose. They connected the heroic outlaw to every common man who worked with his hands. They showed that the spirit of resistance was not born in a castle, but in the workshop and the field, and that the merry men were a true cross-section of England itself, a brotherhood built on the shared strength of the people. A king's justice could be found in the greenwood as easily as in his own court. The legend of the royal pardon brings King Richard the Lionheart himself into the heart of Sherwood, not with an army, but in disguise. He had heard the tales of the outlaw who plagued his sheriff, and his curiosity was piqued. Disguised as a wealthy abbot or a simple knight, the king and his small retinue allowed themselves to be waylaid by Robin and his men. The customary challenge was issued, a test of the traveler's character and wealth, but this time the tables were turned with regal authority. Robin, ever the gracious host to those he deemed honorable, invited the stranger to a feast. They sat together on the forest floor, sharing venison and ale, and Robin spoke freely of his code, of his war against the corrupt officials who oppressed the common people in the king's name. He believed he was explaining himself to just another noble, little knowing he was confessing his entire philosophy to his sovereign. The king listened, his own disguise allowing him to hear the unfiltered truth of his realm. Then came the moment of revelation, perhaps during an archery contest where the disguised king's own skill was unmistakable, or simply through a bold declaration, Richard threw back his hood and revealed the royal lions on his tunic. A stunned silence fell over the clearing. The merry men braced for a fight or for a rest, but the king's reaction was not what anyone expected. He laughed, a sound of genuine admiration. He praised Robin's skill, his leadership, and most importantly, the justice of his cause. Then came the offer that would change everything, a full and complete pardon for every crime, and a place of honor in the king's own service. This moment is the great climax of the legend, the point where the central conflict with the crown is resolved not with violence, but with recognition. Yet it creates a profound internal conflict for Robin. For years, his entire identity has been built on defiance, on living outside the law to enforce a higher moral code. Could he simply hang up his bow, trade his Lincoln green for a royal livery, and become a servant of the very system he had dedicated his life to fighting? The freedom of the forest, the loyalty of his men, the direct power to help the poor, all of it would be exchanged for the constrained honor of a courtier. The tale forces him to weigh the value of legitimacy against the purity of his rebellion. In most versions, his loyalty to the king ultimately wins. He accepts the pardon, a symbolic end to his war, and for a time, Robin Hood becomes a knight in the service of Richard the Lionheart. This resolution serves a deep cultural need, transforming the rebellious outlaw into a sanctioned hero, proving that his fight was never against the true king, but against the corruption that festered in his absence. It is the ultimate vindication, the moment the forest's rough justice is finally acknowledged by the highest power in the land. A young squire's future was stolen before his eyes, forcing him to flee into the only place that offered sanctuary. Robin Hood and his men discovered the boy not as a threat, but as a trembling figure hiding in the hollow of an ancient oak, his fine clothes torn and his eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. His name was William, and his story was a familiar tragedy of corrupted power. His noble father had died serving the king overseas, and in his absence, a treacherous uncle had conspired with the sheriff to seize the family lands, branding the rightful heir an outlaw to secure his own claim. William was not just displaced, he was hunted, his very existence a threat to a stolen title. Robin saw in the squire not merely another victim, but a profound opportunity. This was not about a simple robbery or a one-time rescue, it was about investing in the future. He took the young man under his wing, beginning a careful process of mentorship that went far beyond teaching him to wield a sword. The first lesson was not of combat, but of perspective. Robin walked with William through the villages, showing him the people his family was sworn to protect, the farmers and craftsmen who suffered under the weight of his uncle's new taxes and the sheriff's cruelty. He taught the squire that a true noble's worth is measured not by the land he holds, but by the well-being of the people on it. This was the core of the passing of the torch, the deliberate shaping of a new kind of nobility, one infused with the Greenwood's code of justice. The plan to reclaim William's birthright was a masterstroke of psychological warfare. They did not lay siege to the castle. Instead, Robin used the squire's knowledge of its secret passages and family rituals. On the night of a great feast hosted by the uncle, William, now confident and backed by a handful of the merry men, appeared in the great hall not as a beggar, but as a ghost from the past. His sudden presence before the gathered guests, many of whom had served his father, was a powerful accusation in itself. He spoke not of vengeance, but of legacy, reminding them of the oaths they had sworn to his family. The confrontation exposed the uncle's lies and the sheriff's corruption in front of the entire local gentry, turning their own social order against them. With the support of the shamed but honorable guests, William's claim was restored. The tale of the squire completes a crucial arc in Robin's legend. He was no longer just rectifying past wrongs, he was actively building a better future. By guiding this young man, Robin ensured that the ideals he fought for, the balance between power and compassion, would live on in the halls of the nobility long after his own time in the forest was over. The squire represented the ultimate victory, a world where the outlaws in the woods would no longer be necessary because the lords in the castles would finally be just. The forest floor erupted in a chaos of snapping twigs and shouted curses as a dozen armored men crashed through the undergrowth. This was the dance of pursuit, a frantic game where the sheriff's men relied on numbers and brute force, while Robin's band moved with the quiet certainty of those who knew every root and stone. They did not simply run, they flowed, splitting into smaller groups that vanished down trails invisible to the untrained eye. Little John would lead a contingent of guards on a wild chase toward a deceptively open meadow, only for the outlaws to melt into a thicket of thorns they could navigate blindfolded. Will Scarlet, with his fiery agility, might leap to grab a hanging vine, swinging over a treacherous bog that swallowed the boots of his pursuers. The forest itself became their greatest ally, a living, breathing character in the legend. Ancient oaks seemed to shift their roots to trip the guards, while low-hanging branches swept back to deliver stinging blows to any face not ducking in time. Robin himself was a master of misdirection, doubling back on his own trail to come up behind the bewildered search party, or laying a false path that led straight to a bear's den. The very sounds of the woods conspired against the sheriff's men. A jay's cry would signal an outlaw's position, only for the call to be echoed from 3 different directions at once. The rustle of leaves could be the wind, or it could be much the miller's son, lying perfectly still in a pile of fallen foliage as soldiers trampled past, inches from his hiding place. These chases were not just about escape, they were a demonstration of a deeper wisdom. Robin and his men understood the forest as a complex web of life, reading the signs of disturbed earth, bent grass, and the alarm calls of birds as clearly as a scholar reads a book. For the common people hearing these tales, the message was clear. True power was not found in a castle's armory, but in an intimate knowledge of the world around you. The Greenwood was not merely a hiding place, it was a sanctuary for the righteous, a realm that actively protected those who lived in harmony with its laws. Each successful evasion was a victory for cunning over sheer force, a reminder that the spirit of the land itself seemed to stand with the outlaw against the corruption of the town. A mother's desperate cry for help echoed through the quiet of Sherwood. She was a widow, her face etched with the grief of losing her husband and the fresh terror of losing her 3 sons. The sheriff's men had caught them taking a single deer from the royal forest, a crime of hunger punished with the full, brutal weight of the law. Her sons were not violent outlaws, they were desperate boys trying to feed their family, and now they sat in Nottingham's dungeons, their fate sealed by a system that valued a deer's life over their own. Robin listened to her story, his usual mirth replaced by a cold, focused anger. This was the very injustice he existed to fight, the raw exploitation of the powerless. His promise to her was immediate and absolute. He would bring her sons home. The rescue plan relied on perfect timing and the unique skills of his band. Little John and Much the miller's son created a diversion at the castle's main gate, starting a loud, public brawl that drew the guards' attention like moths to a flame. Meanwhile, Robin, Will Scarlet, and a few others, disguised as monks delivering alms to the prisoners, slipped through a lesser-used postern gate. The real challenge was the dungeon itself, a maze of damp corridors and heavy doors. They moved with silent efficiency, neutralizing the few guards on duty before they could raise an alarm. Finding the widow's sons shackled in a shared cell, Robin did not just unlock the door, he spoke quiet words of reassurance, telling them their mother had sent him. The journey back to Sherwood was a tense, shadowy flight, but when the widow saw her sons emerge from the trees, whole and free, her tears were not of sorrow, but of a joy so profound it silenced the entire camp. This tale cements Robin Hood not as a mere robber, but as a guardian for those with no one else to turn. He fought for the widow, the orphan, the common laborer crushed beneath an uncaring law. His rebellion was a shield for the vulnerable, a promise that even in the darkest of times, someone would answer a mother's cry. A different arrow gleamed under the summer sun, this one crafted of pure, polished silver. The contest was held not in Nottingham, but in the nearby town of Barnesdale, hosted by a vain and boastful nobleman who wished to prove his own archers were the finest in the land. The prize was not just the silver arrow, but a purse of gold so heavy it would feed a village for a year. The Sheriff of Nottingham was also in attendance, his eyes constantly scanning the crowd, convinced his old enemy would be drawn to such a public display of skill. Robin knew the risk was immense, but the chance to humiliate two of his foes at once was a temptation he could not resist. His disguise this time was one of age and frailty. He stooped his shoulders, whitened his hair with dust from the road, and carried a bow that appeared weathered and warped. To the noblemen and the guards, he was just another old yeoman, a relic from a past era trying to recapture a shred of glory. He moved slowly through the crowd of younger, stronger men, his movements calculated to seem stiff and uncertain. One by one, the local champions stepped to the line. Their shots were strong and true, each arrow thudding into the targets with confident precision. The noble host smiled, certain the winner would be one of his own men. Then the old yeoman shuffled forward. His first shot was clumsy, the arrow wobbling through the air to land on the very edge of the target. A ripple of polite laughter moved through the crowd. His second shot was better, striking the second ring, a respectable effort for a man of his years. The sheriff, watching with mild interest, almost looked away. For the final shot, the old man drew his bow with a strange, sudden fluidity. The warped bow straightened in his hands, and the arrow flew with a clean, sharp hiss that silenced the field. It struck the dead center of the target, splitting the arrow already lodged there. The crowd erupted in disbelief and cheers. As the stunned nobleman presented the silver arrow and the heavy purse of gold, the old yeoman accepted them with a trembling hand. Then he stood up straight, the years falling from his posture, and looked directly at the sheriff with a familiar, defiant grin. Before anyone could react, he tossed the purse of gold into the crowd, creating an instant, joyful chaos as people scrambled for the coins. In the confusion, he simply vanished, the silver arrow clutched in his hand, and the sheriff's furious shouts lost in the tumult. These archery contest tales became a vital staple of the legend because they played out the same satisfying fantasy again and again. They were not just about winning a prize, but about proving that true merit could hide in plain sight, that the common man possessed a skill that all the wealth and training of the nobility could not match. Each contest, whether for a golden or a silver arrow, reinforced Robin's unchallenged status as the greatest archer in England, a symbol of excellence that no amount of power or authority could ever buy or defeat. The creaking of a ship's timbers replaced the rustle of forest leaves. A new call for justice had drawn Robin Hood and his men from their greenwood home to the windswept English coast, where a different kind of predator ruled the waves. A band of ruthless pirates had been terrorizing the shoreline villages, their black-sailed ship appearing without warning to seize cargo, burn fishing boats, and take prisoners for ransom. Their latest prize was the daughter of a wealthy but honorable merchant, held in a rocky cove until her father paid a king's ransom in silver. The local fishermen, too fearful to confront the armed brigands, could only whisper the name of the one man who might dare to challenge them. Robin understood that the sea demanded a new kind of warfare. He traded his longbow for a grappling hook and his Lincoln green for the tar-stained clothes of a sailor. With a hand-picked crew of his most agile men, including Little John and Will Scarlet, he secured a small, fast fishing vessel. Their plan was not to meet the pirate ship in open battle, but to use the cover of a thick sea fog to approach the cove under darkness. The raid was a masterclass in audacity. They rowed their small boat in silence, the slap of oars muffled by cloth, until the dark hull of the pirate ship loomed above them like a floating castle. The fight that erupted on the deck was a brutal, close-quarters melee under the dim light of a hanging lantern. Cutlasses clashed against quarterstaffs and English longswords. The pirates, used to bullying unarmed merchants, were stunned by the ferocity and skill of the forest fighters. Little John used his immense strength to clear the deck, while Will Scarlet's quick blade proved a match for any cutlass. Robin himself fought his way toward the captain's cabin, where the merchant's daughter was held. The confrontation with the pirate captain was a whirlwind of steel, a duel decided not by archery but by the swift, decisive thrust of a sword. With their leader fallen, the remaining pirates' morale broke, and they leaped into the dark water to escape. This coastal adventure did more than just add another rescued maiden to the legend. It fundamentally expanded Robin Hood's stage from a local woodland to the entire nation of England. He was no longer just the guardian of Sherwood's paths, but a champion for any English soul threatened by tyranny, whether it wore the sheriff's livery or a pirate's bandana. Storytellers, by sending him to the coast, were weaving a broader tapestry. They made him a hero for the fisherman in his cove, the merchant in his port, and the farmer in his field, a single figure of resistance against all the chaos of a lawless age. His adaptability proved that his code of justice was not bound by any single terrain, but was as vast and enduring as the land itself. A whisper from a sympathetic guard revealed a fortune rolling toward Nottingham. The sheriff had gathered a full season's taxes from the surrounding villages, a heavy chest of silver and gold coins destined to fill his own coffers and those of his royal masters. For Robin Hood, this was more than a simple robbery. It was a chance to strike at the very heart of the system that bled the common people dry. The planning in the Greenwood camp was a model of precision. Scouts were sent to monitor the road, reporting back on the number of guards, their armor, and the exact type of carriage used. Robin knew a direct assault on a fortified convoy would be suicide, so the strategy relied on misdirection and the terrain itself. They chose a spot where the road narrowed between a steep bank and a thicket of dense, thorny bushes, a place where the guards could not easily spread out or maneuver. The ambush unfolded with the quiet efficiency of a well-rehearsed play. As the tax wagon lumbered into the bottleneck, a fallen tree suddenly blocked the path ahead. The lead guards shouted in confusion, their formation breaking as they tried to clear the obstacle. That was the signal. From the high bank, a volley of arrows whistled down, not aimed at the men, but at the horses' harnesses and the wheels of the wagon itself. The shots were designed to panic and disable, not to kill. While the guards were distracted, the main force of merry men emerged silently from the thicket behind them. Little John's voice boomed across the road, demanding their surrender. The fight, if it could be called that, was over in moments. The guards, outflanked and outnumbered, were quickly disarmed and tied to trees, left to be found later, humiliated but unharmed. The real prize was the chest, its weight a satisfying burden as it was carried back into the depths of Sherwood. The distribution of the treasure was a ceremony in itself. That evening, trusted members of the band, often much the miller's son or Will Scarlet, would slip into the poorest villages after dark. Coins were left on the doorsteps of widows, pressed into the hands of farmers who could not pay their own rents, and given to shopkeepers struggling to feed their families. This was the ultimate satisfaction for the medieval listener, a fantasy of poetic justice made real. They lived in a world where taxes were an inescapable burden, a weight that crushed the spirit as much as the purse. To hear a story where that stolen wealth was not hoarded, but returned to the people from whom it was unjustly taken, was a profound emotional release. It transformed the cold, impersonal machinery of taxation into a personal wrong, and Robin Hood into the avenging angel who set the balance right. Each coin he distributed was not just charity, it was a message, a tiny spark of rebellion that proved the powerful could be humbled and that the forest itself held a justice sharper than any king's law. A new kind of arrow flew through Sherwood, one guided by a woman's hand. The legends of Robin Hood would be forever changed by the introduction of Maid Marian, a figure whose origins are as varied as the tales themselves. In some of the oldest ballads, she appears as a high-born noblewoman, the ward of a wealthy lord, or even a cousin to the king, a lady of the court trapped by the gilded cage of her status. In other, later stories, she is a woman of the land from the very start, an orphaned heiress fleeing an unwanted marriage, or a fellow outlaw in her own right, as skilled with a bow as any of the merry men. Regardless of her background, her entrance into the narrative always brings a vital new dimension, intertwining the thrill of rebellion with the tenderness of romance. Their first meeting is never a quiet, formal affair. It is often a public spectacle, a grand archery tournament where Robin, perhaps in one of his many disguises, finds himself matched shot for shot by a mysterious competitor who finally removes her hood to reveal a woman of fierce beauty and even fiercer skill. In other tellings, their bond is forged in shared defiance, where Marian, disguised as a page or a simple forester, aids Robin in a daring escape from the sheriff's guards, revealing her true identity only when they are safe deep within the greenwood. She is never merely a prize to be won or a passive figure waiting for rescue. Marian actively chooses her path, rejecting the safety and luxury of her noble life to embrace the dangers and freedoms of the forest. She becomes a full partner in the adventures, her sharp mind often devising the very plans that outwit their enemies, and her courage standing shoulder to shoulder with Robin's in the thick of a fight. This addition of a strong, central female character transformed the legend from a simple saga of male camaraderie into a more complex story of partnership. Her presence introduced the theme of love as a motivating force for justice, a personal stake that deepened Robin's own commitment to creating a better world. The romance between Robin and Marian was not a distraction from their cause, it was an extension of it, a shared dream of a life built on freedom and equality, far from the corrupt halls of power. With Marian in the camp, the greenwood became more than a hideout, it became a home, and the rebellion gained not just a heart, but a soul. A cold mist clung to the forest floor one autumn night, a fog so thick it seemed to swallow the very sound of the merry men's laughter. Around their campfire, the familiar tales felt distant, replaced by an unsettling silence that even the crackling flames could not break. Then, from the deepest shadows between the ancient oaks, a faint blue light began to pulse. It was not the glow of a lantern or a will-o'-the-wisp, but the shimmering form of a young woman, her clothes tattered and her eyes holding a sorrow older than the trees themselves. She was the ghost of a peasant girl, betrayed and murdered by a knight she had trusted, her body hidden in an unmarked grave deep within the sheriff's private hunting grounds. Her spirit could not rest, bound to the earth by the injustice of her death and the theft of a simple silver locket, her only inheritance. This was no enemy to fight with swords, but a wrong that demanded a different kind of courage. Robin and his men of action used to tangible foes, now faced a challenge from beyond the grave. They followed the spectral glow through the gnarled trees, the air growing colder with every step, until they came to a clearing where the girl's form would fade and point a shimmering hand at the earth. Working by the faint ethereal light, they dug into the soft soil until their spades struck something small and metal. It was the locket, tarnished but whole. With the evidence of the crime now in their possession, they gave the girl's remains a proper, solemn burial, marking the spot with a cairn of stones. As the first light of dawn touched the treetops, the ghostly form appeared one last time, not with sorrow, but with a look of profound peace, before fading into the morning mist. Such supernatural tales wove the threads of local folklore directly into the legend's fabric. The medieval world was one where the boundary between the living and the dead was thin, where every forest and stream was thought to have its own spirit. By having Robin Hood confront these spectral wrongs, the storytellers deepened the moral universe of Sherwood. It was no longer just a physical refuge from tyranny, but a spiritual crossroads where all injustices, whether of the flesh or the spirit, could find resolution. The outlaws became more than just rebels, they were restorers of balance for the restless dead, proving that their code of honor extended even into the afterlife. A dark alchemy began to poison the very roots of Sherwood Forest. The final legendary tale pits Robin Hood against a foe whose power was not drawn from a bow or a sword, but from the pages of a forbidden grimoire. The sheriff, his patience exhausted by repeated humiliation, struck a foul bargain with a sinister sorcerer, a shadowy figure who practiced his arts in a secluded tower, promising to deliver the outlaw through means no mere soldier could comprehend. This was no longer a battle of wits against a greedy official, but a struggle for the soul of the greenwood itself against encroaching darkness. The sorcerer's first assault was not with soldiers, but with the forest. He cast illusions so powerful they twisted the familiar paths into terrifying labyrinths. Trees would appear to grasp at the outlaws with gnarled, branch-like hands, and tranquil streams would boil with phantom serpents. He summoned a great, spectral hound that could track a man by the scent of his fear alone, its baying echoing through the night and driving game from the woods, threatening the band with starvation. Robin and his men were fighting an enemy they could not ambush, an unseen force that turned their greatest ally against them. Their courage was tested in ways a sword could not answer. How do you parry a nightmare? How do you shoot an arrow at a mist that whispers your deepest fears? Yet Robin's greatest weapon, his unwavering wit, proved to be a magic of its own. He realized the illusions fed on uncertainty and dread. He taught his men to stand their ground, to see through the deception by focusing on the real, unchanging landmarks of their home, the moss on the north side of an oak, the song of a specific bird. When the spectral hound cornered Little John, Robin did not fire an arrow, but instead held up a sprig of rowan wood, a common folk charm against evil spirits he remembered from an old tale. The beast recoiled, its form flickering, proving that ancient, simple beliefs could hold power against dark sorcery. The final confrontation was a duel of human spirit against unnatural power. The sorcerer, enraged that his arts were failing, confronted Robin directly, hurling bolts of eldritch energy and conjuring a wall of thorny vines to trap him. But Robin, relying on his flawless aim and the pure iron of his arrowheads, a metal long said to break enchantments, fired a single shot that shattered the sorcerer's crystal focus. The magic collapsed instantly, the illusions faded, and the forest returned to its natural state, the oppressive shadow lifting from the greenwood. This fantastical conclusion to the 30 Tales marks the ultimate evolution of the legend. By pushing the narrative into the realm of high fantasy, storytellers were declaring that Robin Hood was no longer just a man, but an idea so powerful it belonged to the world of myth. His enemy was no longer a single corrupt sheriff, but the very concept of supernatural tyranny. His victory affirmed that courage, loyalty, and a clear sense of right could triumph over any darkness, whether it wore a crown or commanded the elements themselves. The legend had transcended its historical roots, becoming a timeless story where the human heart is the most potent magic of all. The written word finally captured the whispers of the greenwood. For centuries, the tales of Robin Hood lived solely on the breath of storytellers, passed from parent to child in flickering firelight, or sung by wandering minstrels in bustling market squares. This fluid, ever-changing oral tradition meant that every village might have its own version of the outlaw's adventures, each one shaped by local grievances and the teller's own imagination. It was a living legend, growing and adapting with every performance. This rich but scattered heritage was nearly lost to time until a Harvard professor named Francis James Child dedicated his life to its preservation. In the late 19th century, Child embarked on a monumental task, scouring libraries and private collections across England and Scotland to track down every surviving version of these traditional songs. His life's work, a 5-volume collection known as the English and Scottish Popular Ballads, became the definitive canon. Within its pages, he catalogued not just the Robin Hood stories, but hundreds of other folk narratives, giving each a number. The Robin Hood tales, including the ones we have just explored, are forever enshrined as the child ballads, a scholarly term that belies their origins in the voices of the common people. The evolution did not stop with oral tradition. With the invention of the printing press, these stories found a new and powerful medium, the broadside ballad. These were single, large sheets of paper printed with a song's lyrics, often accompanied by a crude woodcut image of the hero, and sold for a penny on the streets. This was the birth of mass media for the masses. The broadside standardized the stories to a degree, but they also sensationalized them. Printers, eager to sell copies, would often add new, more outrageous stanzas or combine elements from different tales, creating wild hybrid adventures that had never existed in the older oral versions. This is why you find such dramatic variations in the characters and plots. In some early ballads, for instance, Maid Marian is entirely absent, and the merry men are a much rougher, less jovial crew. The geography of his adventures shifts from Sherwood Forest in Nottinghamshire to Barnesdale in Yorkshire, depending on where the ballad was printed. The legend was not a single, fixed story, but a cultural conversation, a collective daydream of justice that was constantly being rewritten by the very people who cherished it most. Long before any film director placed a bow in an actor's hands, the legend of Robin Hood was being shaped and reshaped by countless anonymous hands, from the medieval minstrel to the London street hawker, each one adding another layer to the enduring myth of the man who defied a kingdom. That green hood has been draped over the shoulders of countless heroes on the silver screen, each actor shaping the legend for a new generation. Errol Flynn's performance in the 1930s defined the character for decades, a dashing and impossibly agile swashbuckler who laughed in the face of danger with a wink and a perfect mustache. His Robin was a romantic adventurer, a reflection of a world seeking escapism and clear-cut heroes. Decades later, Kevin Costner brought a grittier, more grounded outlaw to life, his accent a subject of debate, but his performance capturing a weary determination. This was a Robin Hood for a more cynical age, less concerned with flamboyant swordplay and more with the grim reality of oppression. Then came Russell Crowe's portrayal, thick with mud and moral ambiguity, a brooding warrior haunted by his past. Each of these iconic versions tells us as much about the time they were made in as they do about the medieval hero himself. The core tales have been stretched and reshaped to fit modern sensibilities. The simple justice of the ballads often gains a complex political backbone, commenting on contemporary issues of class warfare and government corruption. The character of Maid Marian evolved from a noble love interest into a fierce fighter and political strategist in her own right, mirroring our own evolving views on gender and power. Why does this 700-year-old story remain so endlessly adaptable? The answer lies in those timeless, beating hearts of the legend, the fight against injustice and the championing of the underdog. These are universal struggles that transcend any specific era. We see ourselves in the fantasy of one person standing up to an overpowering system, of stolen wealth being returned to its rightful owners. Whether he is a cheerful rogue swinging from a chandelier or a summer rebel wading through a battlefield, Robin Hood endures because the need for him never truly fades. He is a permanent fixture in our cultural imagination, a symbol of resistance that we continually reinvent to fight the new tyrants of our own age. And so, from the gritty early ballads to the silver screen, the legend of Robin Hood has proven itself to be as enduring as the ancient oaks of Sherwood Forest. We have journeyed together through 30 tales of heroism, trickery, and the relentless pursuit of justice. Remember, the heart of these stories is not just about an outlaw with a bow, it is about the timeless hope that someone will stand up for the little guy. If you have a favorite Robin Hood tale or a theory about the real man behind the myth, share it in the comments below. Do not forget to like, subscribe, and ring that bell for more journeys into legendary history. Until next time,